Not just the South China Sea, there is a new flashpoint between Beijing and the West. Electric vehicles, specifically Chinese EVs. There are three things you should know about them. One, they are pretty cheap. Two, their quality is good. And three, production is massive. Chinese electric vehicles make up 60% of worldwide sales. 60%. Just one problem though, most of it is domestic, and there's a reason for that. The reason is Western tariffs. Donald Trump had imposed taxes on Chinese EVs when he was president. How much tax? Around 27.5%. His successor, Joe Biden, is doing the same. Reports say he will announce tariffs next week, and the tax on Chinese EVs is expected to be extended. Europe is considering the same. They are investigating Chinese EVs for unfair practices, and after this probe, tariffs could follow. Of course, China won't just accept all of it. Chances are they will retaliate. So this could snowball into a trade war, and all of it over EVs. So tonight we're looking at two major questions. One, why are Chinese EVs so cheap? And two, why do Western governments hate them? So the first question, why are they cheap? One reason is state support. China gives a lot of subsidies to EV makers, around $57 billion from 2016 to 2022. That's what the government has given, $57 billion. As a result, the country has a lot of EV brands. Guess how many? More than 200. What happens when 200 companies make the same thing? The customer has more options. And more options equals less price. But that's just one reason. Chinese companies also make their own batteries. Western firms do not. You see, China has stakes in cobalt and lithium mines around the world. They process these rare earth metals. So Chinese EV makers save money on batteries. You can also add cheap labor and weak factory rules to this mix, so put together, you have a killer product. Until now, these EVs were sold inside China. The domestic market was big, plus the state encouraged people to buy EVs. They gave tax cuts and subsidies. So export was not really on the agenda. But that's changing now. Chinese EV makers know that the domestic market is saturated, so they're looking abroad. This year, China will make up 25% of all EVs sold in Europe. And the US could follow. Yes, there is a 27.5% tariff, but even then, Chinese EVs are cheaper. Let me show you a comparison. The average EV price in the US is around $54,000. A really cheap one costs around $23,000. Compare this to China's BYD Seagull. It costs $10,000 in China. Now add around $5,000 for random modifications. Also add the 27.5% tariff. Even then, the Chinese car is cheaper. And this is just one example. BYD's Dolphin Mini is sold in Mexico. So right next door to the US, it costs around $21,000 there. The Nissan Leaf is quite similar to the Dolphin. Guess how much it costs in the US? Around $29,000. Xiaomi recently launched an electric vehicle. It costs around $29,000. Tesla's Model 3 is very similar to that car. But the Tesla car costs almost $39,000. So the price difference is huge. And US EV makers know this. Elon Musk admitted this on a business call in January. He said Chinese car companies are the most competitive in the world. Which brings us to the second question. Why do Western governments hate Chinese EVs? All of them have climate goals. I'm guessing they also like cheap cars. So why the tariffs? Because the auto industry is a strategic one. In the US, it employs around 9.7 million people. It also makes up around 5% of their national GDP. That's America. In Europe, the dependence is even higher. The auto industry in Europe makes up 7% of the GDP, the EU GDP. It also employs 13 million Europeans. And don't forget the symbolism. We're talking about heritage brands here like Ford, General Motors, BMW, Volkswagen. They were pioneers of the auto industry. And their domination lasted almost a century, so the pattern is quite clear. If you fall behind, you stay behind. Catching up is very hard in this industry, which is why the West is up in arms. The question is, can a trade war be avoided? China is trying to appease some Western governments, especially in Europe. China's Chery Auto is setting up a factory in Spain. BYD is building a plant in Hungary, and Leap Motor is building one in Poland. So Beijing is saying we're not just flooding your markets, we're also giving you jobs. But the West may not buy it. EVs are projected to make up 2/3 of all vehicle sales by 2030. So we're talking about a strategic industry. Expect a brutal and ugly battle to dominate it.
Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost.